Hello. Hello, and yes, please have a seat. Thank you very much. Hello and good morning to everyone. Thanks for being here today, and we're particularly pleased to start again with this series of Hahn lectures. This is the 6th edition. We had to interrupt because of the COVID pandemic. And today we're going to have Professor Sabourian, HAMID Sabourian from Cambridge University. We'll talk about his profile later on. But I'm going to give immediately the floor to Professor Di Pietra, Director, and Professor Bimonte, the Department Chair, for a institutional address. Thank you very much.
Thank you to Professor Dimitri. Thank you, Nicola. And thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Just to give a welcome address to all of you, and first of all to our guests. This is one of the other things restarting after the pandemic. So this is, a perfect opportunity to restart again with something that is important, that is related to a tradition, and related to, the memory of Professor Hahn. He was professor in our school some years ago. So these kind of, meetings, these kind of seminars are, related to his memory, to his teaching, to his research activity. And so I would like to say thank you to Professor HAMID SABOURIAN. And I would like to underline one point that nowadays it is not so clear. In my view, it has to be clear, much clearer than before. We need technology. We need to develop technologies. We need to develop applied research. But in my view, we need to develop theoretical research. This is the ground on which we could build all the other kind of researches. So it is particularly important to develop theoretical researches, because from there we are able to develop the other kind of researches. So it is strongly important if we have such kind of meetings, such kind of seminars, because this is a part of our capacity to develop disruptive innovation in the near future, and we need such kind of meetings, such kind of debates. So thank you so much for the contribution you will give us in the topic you will address in a few moments. Thank you again. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm here, as Nicola said, as the director, head of Department of Economics. So just to say to everyone, to welcome to all the people that is here. I know that you are not here to listen to my words, but to learn from Professor Sabourian. So I just say a few words to say that I'm really happy, because after 3 years, we start again with this Hahn lecture. The last one was in 19, just 4 years ago, just before the COVID. And so this is like a new start for us. And it is a very important moment, because it's one of the initiatives that the department organized to spread knowledge and research teams, and to develop international relation. Once we had a lot of people here in Siena, and one of these was Hahn. I think that Nicola will say something about that. So just I hope that this is a good moment for everyone. And thank you, Professor Sabourian, and thank you to all of you to be here and enjoy the speech.
Thank you, Roberto. Thank you, Salvatore. So now, before giving the floor to Professor Pagano, who, by the way, let me say, he was the one to make all this possible for our department in the 90s, when he was able to attract Professor Hahn from Cambridge to here at in the second part, maybe third part of his career. Before giving the floor to Professor Pagano, I would like to sketch first a little bio of Professor Sabourian. Now, we're particularly pleased to have Professor Sabourian here today because he's actually confirming the line that we had so far with the previous 5 lectures, where we had really distinguished economists. Let me just remind that we started in 2014. We had Professor Backhouse from Birmingham University. Birmingham University was actually the first university where Professor Hahn was appointed as an academic. And then in 2015, we had Professor Muskin from Harvard. Then 2017, Professor Stiglitz. 2018, Professor Oliver Hart. 2019, Professor Rubinstein from Tel Aviv and New York University. And so, as I said, we're particularly pleased to have Professor Sabourian today to continue along that line. Now, the memory of Frank Hahn is not just a contemplative memory. This series, I think, for us are an opportunity to host prestigious speakers who could actually create spillovers to students, faculties, so on and so forth, in the style, for the whole academic community and the city as well. And that was the style of Frank Hahn, I suppose. So he would actually spill over many directions. And one of these directions was Professor Sabourian, in fact, who was part of as professor in Cambridge. He also, so let me just now sketch briefly his bio. Professor Sabourian actually got his PhD degree from Cambridge, and that's where he sort of started to interact with Professor Hahn. He's now a professor in Cambridge and is fellow King's College and fellow the British Academy as well. He's been chair of the Faculty of Economics. He's been director of the Keynes Fund, and he's also Keynes Fellow. He's been visiting professor in I don't know how many prestigious universities around the world. We can just mention Yale, Hong Kong University, Berkeley, NYU, Singapore, Abu Dhabi, etc. Abu Dhabi, NYU. His research interests are mostly on theory, okay, economic theory and game theory. In fact, he's professor of microeconomics and game theory, economics and game theory, and he's published, widely spectrum of papers in top journals, top theory journals. And we were just discussing before the beginning, he recently became interested also in some applications, and today's talk is actually related to one of these applications. I think it's about it. The last thing I want to say before giving the floor to Professor Pagano is that Professor Sabourian was part of this very talented young economists who were actually brought up by Professor Hahn in Cambridge, and who just later on spread out around the world, having prestigious positions in academia and other institutions. So he's a testimony of what, one of the contributions that Professor Hahn gave to the profession to foster young economists and to bring up young economists. I now give the floor to Professor Pagano for his introduction. Just 1 second. Yes, Ugo, wait for a second?
Yeah, just 1 second, because I forgot to thank you, Nicola, because you devoted a lot of your time to organize this day, and I know
Ugo is the one.
also Ugo.
Ugo.
Okay. Now, with Hamid, we, again, Professor Sabourian, we know each other since a long time. We have really a change for this Hahn lecture, because really Hamid is the first giver of this lecture that I knew when he was a student of Frank Hahn, and he was supervised by Frank Hahn in Cambridge. And we had this, at that time, I must say that I did not know Frank very well, because Frank Hahn, in fact, was my external examiner. So he directly appeared, in my life for the PhD examination. He liked my thesis, and then after that, we became friends, and then colleagues in Cambridge. And then I attracted, Frank Hahn in Siena, as Nicola was mentioning. So we shared, this relation with Frank. Even if Frank was a very antagonizing person, he was at the same time a very, very nice person. And also he was antagonizing in a nice way. For instance, when he will give a talk like this one to Cambridge students, he will say to those students of Cambridge, those places where they produce economists like MIT, whereas here in Cambridge, we just produce gentlemen, then he will go to MIT and he will say, those places like Cambridge, where they produce economists, whereas here they just produce plumbers. So he always, found some nice way, to deal with the audience. Now, what Hamid will talk about is a fundamental problem. It's something that even independently of the stock exchange, we always ask ourselves, should I follow the crowd? Should I follow the opinion of the majority? Or what at the moment is my belief? This is a fundamental thing. Sometimes you are accused of being just a person without personality who follows the other, or just a person who is always a contrarian. And so this is really a very important thing. And Hamid will give several contributions, and some are very sophisticated. They appear on this contribution on econometrica, and very much depends on U-shaped and ill-shaped signals that can simulate then herding and contrarian behavior, and can generate relevant price fluctuation. This is what Hamid will talk about in a short time. What I want to say here is just that this problem is very relevant, and is going to be relevant always, for not only for economists, but for all sorts of fields. And perhaps in economics, the first person who, with reference to the stock exchange, attracted the attention to this problem, of course, was Keynes and his famous beauty context. The beauty context is, many of you already know about it, but I mean, what Keynes was saying is that imagine a beauty context where everyone in the jury has to decide which person has the most beautiful face. That is a simple task for the jury. But now imagine a beauty context where everyone in the jury has to guess which one, according to the majority of the jury, has got the most beautiful face. Then in this situation, everyone will try to guess what is the opinion of the other, and you will get in this problem that I think, that you think, that I think, that you think, and a lot of her behavior and messy behavior, in a way, may follow from that. And in fact, for Keynes, stock exchange were a bit of casinos. They were not something that he particularly liked. But of course, there are some rules in these casinos, practical rules and theoretical rules. Hamid will talk about some of these theoretical rules. I must say that Hamid has always been, at least I remember being also a practitioner of the stock exchange. I'll still remember that when we were watching together the World Cup in 1986, that was won by Maradona's Argentina in his house. Then we were watching television together, but he had already a system that at the same time he could check the fluctuation of the stock exchange while watching the soccer game. So he has always had some practical attention for these things. And I myself, I have never been a practitioner of the stock exchange, is a bit of a shame, because my grandfather was the chairman of the stock exchange of my town, so I should have followed this example. But it was not really a choice. The problem in my life that I have had 4 daughters, and I was always in debt trying to buy houses and things like this. So I'm not the raw material, to train myself. The only thing that I could say is that I had a chance to talk with another famous speculator that I met quite a few number of times in a certain period of my life. That was George Soros. And George Soros really, with reference to herding, had a very clear view. Often the others were herding, having in their mind the long theory, and he had in his mind the right theory. And the only basic problem for him was that for a while you should follow the crowd, because this had real effect in appreciating the value of stocks. But then you should stop riding the bubble before it will burst. And I say, well, that's great, but I asked him, how do you know when it's going to burst? And then he just said, well, I get a pain in my back. And I then decided that my back was not sensitive enough that I would do that job. And I did not have any clear explanation for that. Now, the last thing that I would like to say is that the relevance of this issue is not only for economics and other social science, but it goes beyond that. And one interesting field of application is also biology. Now, of course, herd behavior is very widespread among animals. You can save your life by being in a herd. It's much more difficult for predators to attack. This is an elementary idea. But what is more interesting and sophisticated in this respect is the recent work that has been done by the Nobel Prize winner, Giorgio Parisi. And Giorgio Parisi has modeled the behavior of starlings. You know that starlings, storni in Italian, are those birds, that in many Italian towns, they produce incredibly complex figures, really beautiful geometric figures. And they are very complex. And so he could say how these birds, will produce these figures and coordinate in this way. And then Giorgio Parisi came out with this model that was quite simple in a way, where the behavior of these starlings was really guided by very simple rules, like keep a certain distance with the other bird and other things like this. And these simple rules, these simple herding rules, were enough, to produce this type of behavior. But what is more remarkable is that you may wonder who is basically leading the crowd in this situation. So who is leading the herd? And what Giorgio Parisi discovered was that it was due to the starlings that were at the boundary of the herd, which one was the direction of the crowd. So the signal was going from the birds on the boundary to the other birds. And if you think about it, it makes sense, because the birds that are at the boundary are the ones that have got better information about predators. They can see what is going on, and the one in the center don't know. So this is really a case in which also starling, following the crowd with rational learning and social learning in an uncertain world where hawks and falcons and other predators could be anywhere, do something similar to what Sabourian is going to talk about. And this really shows the generality of his talk. By the way, we can say that in the case of starling, this is very rational herding, simple rules, very effective. And in this case, it's not like Keynes' casino, but it's something that helps their survival. Okay, thank you. And it's a pleasure to give the floor to Hamid.
Well, can I just stop you for a second? You haven't started yet, I know, but I just want to thank our sponsor, who I didn't thank at the beginning. I'm sorry about that. Chianti Banca, who's always actually supported this initiative. So thanks very much. Now, let me just conclude by saying that Frank Hahn was born in 1925, passed away in 2013. He's been a mathematician by background and then took a PhD in economics at LSE. I'm just sort of shortening a long story just to give a sense, especially to young students who haven't been here before for these lectures, that he actually was part of 4 universities as a university professor. He started off in Birmingham, then he moved as a reader to Cambridge, fellow of Churchill College, then became professor at LSE in London, came back as a professor to Cambridge, and then in the last part of his career from 90 to 96, he was faculty member here in Siena, and he was also director of the PhD program. I think it's about it, and if we're ready, I think we can start with Professor Sabourian. Thank you very much, Hamid.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be in the great city of Siena. I've been here a number of times. And let me just start. Nicola asked me to say a few things about Frank, and he was saying, can you recall something? And my problem was actually, I wrote to him, the problem about talking about Frank, closer. Problem with speaking about Frank is that I don't know when to stop. So I was given 1 hour, 15 minutes for this talk, and I will try to be as brief as possible to give you a sense of my memory of Frank. He had a major influence on my life, intellectually and at the personal level. When I came across him, I was a second-year undergraduate, and I went to his famous microeconomics lectures, and this is late 70s, and he was a giant in the field. I had no idea at the time how much of a giant he was. And he gave out these lecture notes that were just, I mean, he was giving about 20 hours of lectures, and the lecture notes were about 500 pages. And he came in, and at the beginning of each lecture, he said something like, well, these lecture notes are these lecture notes are brilliant, probably the best thing ever written on microeconomics, and is going to be well beyond any of you. But I will give it to you because I have to. And it truly was. I think the lecture notes were beyond almost all of us and what we all pretended. And I couldn't make up my mind whether I liked him or not. There was something very appealing, but on the other hand, he was also would make all kinds of comments. Then by the time I became a graduate student, he got funding from the UK Research Council, and he ran a project, and he had money to dish out to 1 PhD students. And I applied, and I got this studentship, this money, but I was very hesitant about joining because at the time I was very radical on the left, and my image of him was that he's a fascist hyena. But you know, even if you think that, there's always a price that clears the market. So the price was the funding, and I was willing to go and join. So in the early 80s, I joined, and I went to see him the first time as a PhD student. And I went, and I got myself together and went there. And I said, Professor Hahn, and he said, who are you? And I said, we arranged to meet. He said, what's your background? I said, I'm Iranian of origin. He said, well, I will call you Khomeini from now onwards. And then I said, what shall I work on, Professor Hahn? And he turned around, he said, my boy, listen to the uncle very carefully. If I knew what you had to work on, I would do it myself and make myself even more famous than I currently am. And then he giggled, and I thought, this is going to be fun. And he said, and then he went on, he said, well, I don't know what you should really work on. Maybe what you should do is you should go away and do some existence theorem in some infinite dimensional space that I have never heard of, and completely useless, but this way at least you might impress me. So I went away, and I was scared of coming back, and I tried to learn some functional analysis, and I tried to, and didn't get anywhere with, I learned some maths, and at the end I decided Frank Hahn was working on a project, and this was a research project on conjectural equilibrium, and for him, he was really trying to do Keynes or Keynesian economics in a very general setup, in a general equilibrium foundation or micro foundation of Keynesian economics. And his project was called Conjectural Equilibrium. So I started working on that. And my first paper, I had something, and I went back to see Frank, and I gave it to him, and he said, and after he looked at it, the project, and the paper that I did was to show that what Frank Hahn was doing, which was conjectural equilibrium, was very much the same as what was going on as dynamic games or game theory. So that was I was making a connection between conjectural equilibrium and game theory or dynamic games. And he read it, and he said, I knew it. You Middle Easterners, you Arabs, Jews, Persians, that's me, you're all the same. Game theory appeals to you because it's all about if I do this, then he will do that to me, and then I'll do this to him, and then he will do that to me, and so on. Whereas I, Frank Hahn, I'm a British gentleman. I like to go to the market and buy, the price is quoted to me, and I buy as much as I want, and so on and so forth. So this was my introduction to Frank Hahn, the first few years. He really was very quickly, I was taken by his humor and his approach. It wasn't just me. We were a whole group of young people in Cambridge and elsewhere. We actually discovered this kind of feeling of wanting to be around him was actually quite global. Some people, it wasn't universal. Some people wanted to run away from him, but the rest of us were actually wanted to go and be around when he was around. So in Cambridge at the time, we had a coffee room, and Frank would go to this coffee room at 11:15, and it was a very diverse faculty. People had very strong views and methodology and so on, but everyone just before 11:15 was queuing up to get into the coffee room in order to go there, basically partly because to enjoy his humor, which often involved insulting you, but in a funniest way, as Ugo was describing, or to actually, he was more than just someone who provided humor. He was really truly an intellectual. His intellect was, and his knowledge of economic theory was really quite breathtaking at the time. In Cambridge and in Stanford, he was there always in the summer. There was some institute, mathematical institute for social sciences. He dominated the seminars, and they were all, the great and the giants of our profession were there. And Frank was absolutely the dominant person intellectually. He was 100% attentive in every seminar. I mean, you couldn't go to a seminar and he was there. He would say after 15 minutes, this is very, terrible. He could be very rude to the speaker, but he would actually stay right to the end, and he would contribute and make comments that were very useful for the speakers and the rest of us. His own research, he worked on very fundamental issues, from stability of general equilibrium, i.e. whether invisible hand works, foundation of Keynesian economics, and money. Last, I just want to go back to his impact on me. He taught me several lessons that I carry on. I hope the impact, he taught me the importance of careful thinking and theorizing. That so much of our subject, economics and social science, is the details matter. He also taught me that economics is not just about, or economic modeling is not just about saying what will happen or just normative economics, is also about understanding. So to him, a great deal of economics was just to understand, to have a framework. Economics was a framework for thinking about problems that we face. In later life, he became obsessed with how economic theory was being abused by so many people in the profession, especially macroeconomics, rational expectation. Lucas was not his favorite person. And this did not make him popular in many circles. Rounding up on Frank, let me just say, to me, Frank Hahn was a maverick and a non-conformist giant of economic theory of his days. Therefore, it's a great pleasure to be able to talk about conformity, the opposite of what he was, in his memory. So let me turn to my talk. So following or being influenced by other people is an old phenomenon. For example, spread of great religions was probably fueled by conformity. Many of the topical issues of the days, such as extremism, polarization, identity, climate movement, anti-climate movement, etc., may also have something to do with conformity and herding. We also have conformity in terms of its local conformity, cultural norms that are regional, investors piling in stocks, that Ugo mentioned. By the way, I should add that, yes, I have been involved with investment, and my investment consistently has done badly for the last 35 years. Politicians, policymakers, forecasters, they make similar sound bites constantly, policies. Experts do the same thing. And when we look at schools, some schools are bad behavior is very common. Other schools, bad behavior, they're not. To navigate the uncertain world, we have to rely on the information that other people have. This information comes to us by observing the actions or the words of others. And we kind of think about the rational individual in our economics framework. We think about learning should be at the individual level, should be beneficial. Otherwise, why would you do it? However, the question is, when we are at individual level, whether something is rational, we are learning, at the macro level, at the group level, the outcome can end up being very harmful. The negative consequence of this social learning is really surprising, because we have, on the other hand, we have the other kind of methodology, which we believe that aggregating people's information is beneficial. There's the idea of wisdom of the crowd. While a great deal of social learning and herding may have something to do with behavioral psychological traits, Ugo mentioned some, here I want to kind of, in my talk, I want to limit what I'm going to say to environments in which people are rational and self-interested. So I think Frank would have approved of this. Now, herding models with rational agents, in the literature, we can broadly divide them into three categories. One category is you herd conformity we observe because of payoff explanations. These are externalities in payoffs in our utilities. If other people are running, there's a bank run, other people are taking their money out, therefore I have to take my money out before it becomes I don't get anything. There's also reputational herding. Individuals we herd because we are concerned about our reputation. The third kind of herding is information, what's called informational herding. Here, conformity of behavior emerges because of individuals' private information is swamped by the information derived from the observing others. So these rational herders deliberately might go against their own best judgment and follow the crowd because the information they get from the crowd is more important than the information they have. So it's the idea that if many people do X, Y, and Z, they must be up to, they must know something. 10 million Elvis fans can't be all wrong. Often the outcome of these kind of informational herding models is informational cascade. Cascades are situations in which individuals completely, when they make their decisions, they ignore their private information. These three explanations I've given for herding, they're not inconsistent with each other. In fact, the second one, the reputational one, can be described in terms of the third one, the informational one. So I'm going to concentrate in this talk on the third one, on informational herding. And I'm going to give some introduction to this basic model of informational herding. And then hopefully, if I have time, I talk about two applications that I've been involved in. I've worked on one on herding in financial market. I've chosen these two extremes. And the second one, herding amongst in transplantation, organ transplantation. So these are the two that I'm going to talk about. So let me start with the basic. The basic models of informational herding starts with two early papers, Bikshandani, Hirschleifer, Welsh, BHW, and Banerjee. I'm going to take an example, the example from the BHW, and think of a situation that there is a finite or countably infinite number of rational agents, people, decision makers, and they have to make decisions in an uncertain world. The uncertainty is about the state of the world, the state of nature. And this state of nature, let's call it theta. And theta could be either F or I. Initially, people believe that theta is F with some probability, let's call it P1, and theta is R with some complementary probability, 1 minus P1. These agents, they have to make a binary decision, and the decision is either F or I. So the game is really about guessing what is the state of nature. Agents, these people make their decisions sequentially. So agent T makes his decision at time T. So they all go one at a time and make their decision. And when they make their decision, the actions of what the others did is observable to them. The utility, the payoff of each agent T is we're going to normalize it if what you choose is actually the correct state of the world, you guess rightly, then you get 1. And if you get it wrong, your choice doesn't match with the truth, you get 0. So many contexts, I mean, it's really is very simple, but this describes many contexts. So think of a classic example. Think of the choice is between there's a French restaurant and there is an Italian restaurant. And this is F and I. And the state of nature, what is the truth, is one of these restaurants is better quality. Is it the French one or is it the Italian one? And people arrive, and these two restaurants are in some village, some place, and people arrive sequentially, and they decide to sit. And when you sit, you have to make a decision. You see how many people are sitting in the different restaurant. And that's the story we are describing. And you want to go to the restaurant that is better. Or if you think about F and I as being two different investments, and people have to make decisions, and which one is better. Another one, which might have something to do with the kind of extremism or opinions or beliefs of people, would be individuals. We express our views, and now we do it with our social media. And there are two kinds of beliefs, I or F, and one of them is about whether you think genetic modification of food is good, and another one is, and the other one, F, is no, genetic modification is not a problem. So is one of them is no problem, or is it a bad thing? Or central banks, they have to kind of take yourself back to 2009, and central banks have to make decisions on things are really falling apart, and do we want to do quantitative easing? Now, none of them had done it before, and they observe each other. The Fed might start doing it, and then the Japanese central bank might start doing it. These central banks, these experts, also operate in this uncertain world, and they have to get it right, and they also observe what others have done. So let's go back to the model. So each agent, we have them, they move sequentially. They have access to both some public information and some private one. The public information, let's call it HT, is the history of what has happened so far, the decisions that all the other people have made, that have made decisions before them. And the private information or signal, I use both words, they mean the same thing, private information or signal, call it ST. And these individuals, they also get some information, private information, ST, that this information is either small f or small I. So what does these small f and small I is? Well, if you have your own, so think of the restaurant story. Before you go to the restaurant, you have your own assessment of private assessment of how good the French restaurant is. It may be that you have talked to some friends, you've read some reviews. So the F private signal is the one, small f private signal is the one that implies French restaurant is likely to be the better one. Or small I is that the Italian restaurant is more likely to be the better one. And we're going to assume this is, I'm going to have probabilities, these are conditional probabilities. We're going to assume that these informativeness of these signals, as small f and small I, they have some informativeness, and we describe this informativeness of the signal with these conditional probability. So the likelihood that that the individual receives information small f, given that the better restaurant is, the French restaurant is the better one, is Q, and Q is we're going to assume is going to be bigger than half. So you're more likely, so if French restaurant is better, is probably your private assessment, you have talked to friends, etc., is more likely to say, that's what Q is bigger than half, that the French restaurant is more likely to be the better one. So Q is really the precision, how good your private information is. And we're going to assume that it's bigger than half, so it's informative. And the higher the Q is, the Q, if it's equal to 1, it means that your private information is fully informative. And the so the individuals, individual T has access to this public information, small ht, and some private information, st. And and what's his optimal choice, her optimal choice? Well, the optimal choice is you want to go to the French restaurant if your belief is that the French one that is a better one, conditional on the public information HT and your private information ST. If this is bigger than half, you will go, if you think that French restaurant is better, more likely to be better, you would choose F. Otherwise, you would choose the Italian restaurant. And this is the setup, and what's the key results? So the key result of this BHW, or the standard herding model, is that with probability 1, there's going to be a herd and a cascade. Significant amount of available information is lost, and in large number of cases, people will be making there will be wrong cascade. How does it work? So let's just start with the initial belief. Sorry, I'm trying to work out. What time did I start? Yeah, I just want to know my timing. 12 o'clock I started. Sorry, 1 o'clock I started. Okay. So how does it work? So think of P1 is half. So that means initially you think that both restaurants are equally as good as each other. Equally is going to be likely that French is, you can't really say which one is better. So let's start with that. And because and suppose that the first individual comes along and his signal is small f, says the French restaurant is better, what will he do? He will also, then he will choose, that's the only information he has, his own private information, so he will choose the French restaurant. On the other hand, if his private information was small I, he would choose the Italian restaurant. So his action, whatever he does, reveals his signal, his private information, because there's a one-to-one mapping between information and the action he will choose. Now, let's look at the, suppose that the first person has chosen the French restaurant, F. Now, the second guy comes along and immediately deduces that, knows that the first person is sitting in at the French restaurant. So the second guy concludes that the first agent must have received small f signal. So if 2 receives also f, then he will go to the French restaurant because he knows that the first guy receives small f, second, he has received small f, so there are 2 signals, private signals in favor of the French restaurant, so he will choose f. If 2, on the other hand, receives a signal I, that the Italian is better, then his signal cancels out with, he knows that the first guy must have received small f, the 2 has canceled out, and so the 2 signals have canceling out, so agent 2 is indifferent between French and Italian, and let's say we adopt a tie-breaking rule that the second guy in that case randomizes. So the second guy either goes to seeing that the first person is f, is either does f, or is randomizing between the 2. Now let's look at the decision problem of the third person. Suppose the first 2 have chosen f. Now, the third guy observes this and reasons the following way. He says, well, the first guy must have received the signal small f, must have had one piece of information in favor of the French. And the second guy has chosen f, so that means the second guy either chose f, or either received small f, or he received I and he randomized. So the public information that agent 3 has is that there has been more than one signal in favor of small f. The first guy and a bit more because the second guy has also chosen, so more than one signal in favor of small f. So now the third guy must be the case that the third rational guy must also go to the French restaurant, because if 3, the third guy, receives small f, then he concludes that effectively the net number of f signals exceeds 2, and if he receives signal small I, he still concludes that the number of f's is more than 1 for the first 2, exceeds his own, which is I. So either way, overall, the net information is that the French restaurant is better. So this is the case of this is the case where 3 signal become the third guy. Whatever his signal is, he will go and follow the first 2. Now, since this third guy's decision doesn't depend on his information, he's going to go to the French restaurant. Agent 4 doesn't learn anything from the decision of agent 3. And agent 4 is in exactly the same situation as agent 3 in the sense that he just knows that the first 2 have more than one piece of information in favor of f, and therefore, and whatever, so this agent 4, whatever signal he receives, on balance, he should go for the French restaurant. And this carries on to the 4th, 5th, 6th, and so on. So by recursion, everyone from the third center will carry on going to the French restaurant if the first 2 have gone to the French restaurant. Now, this can be the case even though theta is I, that's even though the Italian restaurant is the better one. If the first 2 guys by chance end up in the French restaurant, then everyone ends up in the French restaurant. So this is the example of wrong cascade. They get it really wrong. And what's the probability of that? Well, the probability of that, this event happening, is the probability that the first guy goes to, so the I is the better restaurant. So theta is I, the truth is I. What's the probability that the first guy goes to the French is 1 minus q, and the second guy going to the French because of the randomization is 1 minus q over 2. This is the probability that the first 2 will go to the French restaurant, and therefore cascade, wrong cascade starts. This number, when Q is close to half, so it's above half, it's informative, but it's close to half, so people are not it's a very uncertain world. This probability is 3/8, is close to 3/8. So it's not insignificant, the likelihood of this wrong cascade. This model cascade will, if you carry on, cascade will start at some point. At some point, the dynamic will get to cascade. An interesting feature of this BHW model result on cascade is that the cascades are very precarious. Agents in a cascade are somewhat close to indifferent between two alternatives. It's really the first two have gone one way, and I'm just comparing with my own signal. So it's really, it's not that there is a large number of people who have gone and done something, have gone to the French. It just requires that the first two people. So these cascades are very fragile. A small change in some of the parameters somewhere down the line actually will shatter the cascade. So, so in some sense, you can think of these cascade models offer a possible explanation for why social behavior are often idiosyncratic and volatile as well. This kind of cascade, of course, goes against the wisdom of the crowd that I started. So what's the wisdom of the crowd idea? Well, let's change the story and suppose that instead of people observing other people's actions, people actually observe other people's private information. Then the probability of whether, you know, the French restaurant is good or the Italian is good is conditional on not you can observe information. Then this is conditional on everyone's private information. This probability increases because there's more information is coming in, and by law of large number, this will converge to the truth. So if we have access to everyone's information, that's the wisdom of the crowd, we would actually have, you know, efficient outcome will be learned in this example. But what's happening is this, that we observe each other's actions. Some additional comment on this, and I'll stop and turn to some applications that I've worked on. The conclusion of this BHW are robust to many extensions. You know, I described this example, binary assumptions everywhere. You know, you don't need the binary assumptions. It can be relaxed. The fixed sequential nature of the moves can be relaxed. We could introduce payoff externalities. So at the moment, the payoffs are only depend on you just guessing the state of nature. We could have more complicated games, and depending on the nature of payoff externalities, this can reinforce or oppose the formation of cascades. We can have acquiring, you know, these private informations are not costless. You actually might have to pay for it. If you introduce that, you actually encourage more cascades. And then the last thing on extensions I just want to mention is that, you know, the setup at the moment that I've just given you, there's a linear order. We observe each other's behavior. Of course, network of social connections are very complex. So there's a large literature on this social learning and social learning in networks. And the general lesson of that is that if you have networks, so the connections, this social learning is more likely in networks which are non-egalitarian. So some member price fluctuations are possible, but you know, these are possible if there are people, you know, agents, traders, investors, if they dramatically change their behavior, they go from buying to selling or the reverse. Such volatility in behavior are often attributed to animals, spirits, or so this goes to Keynes. However, appeal to the animal spirit's irrationality may not be necessary because you might say market swings could be the result of the rational herding that I mentioned. Whether it's rational herding or whether there's kind of animal spirit irrationality or something really does matter. It matters in terms of policy that are causing the let's take the BHW model and now put it in the context of an efficient financial market. At first sight, you might say this BHW is made for explaining volatility. Not clear, because there is something else goes on in the financial market which is not there in the BHW model that I described. Take the restaurant example. If everyone is piling in to go to the French restaurant, what might happen is that the French restaurant will start jacking its prices up, and the Italian one will start bringing the prices down, and that will stop the cascade and the herding. Another way, so what do you mean? So let me become a bit more clear about what I mean by efficient financial market, a competitive market. What do I mean by that? Let's take the extreme definition of these efficient markets. Efficient markets, let's say, is a market where price of an asset reflects all public information. So the price is constantly changing in response to the trading activity. This may stop an individual from doing the kind of herding and cascade that we described, that I described in BHW model, because suppose a crowd buys a stock frantically. So you see lots of people have bought. And you're a trader, and you have an unfavorable private information. You think the stock is no good, but you see lots of people have bought it. So you will increase your expectation about, how good this stock is, because you can see other people have bought, they must know something. So you become optimistic. But the price will reflect all this information about the crowd buying. So the price has gone up. So it's not clear that you will actually buy. So a cascade actually cannot happen in these efficient financial markets. But herding can, and I'm going to define herding in a slightly different way. I'm going to define herding in a particular way, which might be, I think, is the right way to think about it in financial market. It's close, the way I'm going to define herding is close to the concept of, in the finance literature, or is called momentum trading. So herding, I define it as either you're selling at, so it's a trader with some private information, is selling at some history, and then say at the beginning you want to sell this stock, but then you want to buy it after the price has risen. So after there's been people have been buying it and the price has gone up, now you want to buy it. This is a kind of momentum trading, or what I call herding. Or the other way around, you want to buy at some point, but you want to buy at some point, but when price falls, then you start selling. Of course, this social learning, the herding is not the only kind of social learning you can do. There's a kind of contrarian behavior where you sell at some history and start buying it when the price has fallen. The herding was you start buying it when price has risen. This is you start buying it when price has fallen. And you can have no social learning where you don't change your behavior. So first I want to, this is to go to our two states model, like the BHW. And this example is from Avery Zemsky from American Economic Review. So think of we have a single asset stock. Two possible, the value of this stock is either worth VG or VB. VG is bigger than VB. So VG is the good. It's it's a very valuable stock if VG is the state of the world and VB is not so attractive stock. Both values are equally likely. You don't know which one is. And you have traders arriving in sequence, and they can buy or sell 1 unit of this asset, this asset. And each one observes what's happened before. In addition, each trader has their own private judgment, their own signal S, which is small g or small b. If it's small g, it's more likely you think that VG, the state of the world, is good. And if it's small b, the bad signal, you think the true value of the asset is VB. If the price of the asset was fixed, then we are exactly situation as the BHW, and we could get cascade, etc. But we're going to have an efficient market. So the efficient market says the price of this asset is also moving around and is equal to the expected value of the asset conditional on the public information. Now, now we have VG is bigger than VB. So it must be that if you have the good signal, if you have, this is the expected value of the asset conditional on the public information. On the left-hand side of this inequality is the expected value of this asset conditional on the public information, but you have also an extra signal, your private information. And your private information says the world is good. So it must be that this inequality holds, that if you have the good information, then you think this stock is more valuable relative to if you don't have it. And the other way around, if you have the bad signal, then you think that it's actually worse than if you didn't have this signal B. So, but the right-hand side is just the price. So the price of the asset is always between the expected value conditional on the public information and the good private information, and the expected value conditional on public information and the bad signal. This inequality must hold. The PT is always going to be, in the efficient world, is going to satisfy this inequality. What that means is that you cannot have, so what that means is that if you have a signal small g, you always will be buying, because this inequality always holds. And if you have a signal small b, the bad signal, you always will be selling into this market. So you can't have herding or contrarian, because you don't, for any signal, if your signal is G, you're always buying. You're never going to change to the other side. So the kind of herding or contrarian that I mentioned is not possible if when you have efficient market and there are two states of the world. The asset can only have two possible values, VG or VB. The conclusion that actually the literature drew from this, the conclusion people had, was that with efficient market, you can't have herding or contrarian view, because price is adjusting to kind of kill off these social learning. This is an example of, I always give this to my students. People say, make the model as simple as possible. Sometimes when you make model too simple, you get the wrong conclusion. And this conclusion is not true as soon as you have more than two signals. So, as soon as you have more than two states of the world, two values for that the stock could have. So let me just carry on with this example, but I'm now going to say that this value of this asset can take three values: V1, V2, and V3. And V3 is the best state of the world. This is the stock is very valuable. This is middle, and this is the V1 is if the stock is only worth this much, it's not an attractive stock. And now we have the asset is traded. We have the sequential trading. The traders come, they buy and sell 1 unit. They all observe what the previous guys have done. They also have some private information, S, which is small g. Let's call it S. There may be more than once, more than two signals even. And the asset price is set, the price of it is set efficiently in the sense that I mentioned before. Now I'm going to kind of has said that capital G or capital B. What is capital B? Capital B is a public news. It says it's a really bad news. It's public, everyone knows it. It says the third state, the really good one, the V3, is not possible. So the world is either V1 or V2. And the good public news, capital G, is the first state, the V1 is not possible. So the world is either V2 or V3. So after these two public announcements, you're in the two-state world. And suppose a trader with signal S, we have a trader with signal small s, sells after bad news and buy public news and buys after good public news. So that means he's selling after the price has fallen, because this is the price when the public news is bad. So you're selling when the price has fallen, and you're buying when after a capital G. So suppose that there is some trader that does this. Well, that person must be herding in the sense that I just described, in the sense that I was describing before. You're selling when things are, so it's not so valuable, and you're buying when things are very expensive. You're changing behavior in this way. So when does this happen? Well, this trader is selling when after a bad public signal, capital B. So it must be that his private information, his expectation after you add his private information must be below the expected value without the private information S. So he's selling in this situation, and he's buying. His S is such that he's buying. So it must be that his expectation when he has the S, after he has G is bigger than the price when G is announced. So this is, if these two things hold, this person must be herding in the sense that I described. Can these two things happen at the same time? Yes. Well, how can the first inequality happen? So you're selling after capital B is announced. Well, when capital B is announced, you know that the only possible states of the world is V1 and V2, because capital B says V3 has not happened. So V1 is worse than V2. So this first inequality is equivalent to saying that your information is less favorable to the better state V2 than V1. You think that V1 is more likely. So this first inequality is equivalent to this inequality, is equivalent to this inequality I've just written here. It must be that your private information says that the V1 is more likely to have generated it than V2. How does the second inequality come about? Well, the second inequality comes about is after public announcement capital G. Capital G means the world is either V2 or V3. So you're buying in this situation. Well, this must be, you will buy if your signal, your private signal is more favorable to V3 than V2. So this second inequality, this should be, there's a typo, there's a G here. This second inequality is the case when it can only happen if your signal basically says V3 is more likely than V2. So writing it, those two inequalities can happen if your private information has this, satisfy these two inequalities. These two inequalities are equivalent to the two that I had before. What does it say? It says your private information is more likely to happen. The two extreme states, V1 and V3, are more likely to have generated the signal S than the middle state, V2. I call this kind of information U-shaped. So the U-shaped is a condition for herding. So your private information, if it has this feature, to get contrarian, you need, it's equivalent to actually having these conditional probabilities being hill-shaped. And if it's neither hill, if it's monotonic, these conditional probabilities are monotonic, then you're not going to have neither herding nor contrarian behavior. So this is just, I'm now going back. What was these announcements that I just mentioned, these public announcements, capital B and capital G? Well, I said, there is an announcement. But that was a trick. I just brought that announcement. How does it fit in our trading model? Well, these announcements, the same conclusions hold if you have, this announcement was that G means V1 is impossible, and B was, sorry, this should be V3, was impossible. This capital B and capital G, we could also, those we set, they were such that they excluded the extreme states. We could also say that those public announcements are almost excluded. They are close to zero, but they are still positive. Can such a public announcements happen? Yes, they can happen. For example, if you have a long history of buys, lots of people have bought. There is, and people can see that. People can see that lots of people have been buying. Then this public history, HT, that involves a long history of buys, that's effectively equivalent to public announcement B, because it says V1 is very unlikely, because there wouldn't have been these lots of buys. And the same thing, capital G is equivalent to having large number of sells, and that's what that public announcement is. So we put all this together, and we had this this paper of mine with Andreas Park. We kind of showed that to actually have social learning, the herding behavior will happen if and only if there is this kind of U-shaped signals and hill-shaped signals for contrarian. What's the these U-shaped signals, people, so herding happens, or U-shaped signals, if you have those, it really, what it means is that these kind of people with U-shape, they are prone to have the signals that make them believe extreme outcomes have occurred with a higher probability than moderate ones. They are kind of they have a fat tail posterior distributions. Informing your belief, the recipient of such signals, they shift weight away from the center to the extreme. So that's what doing the herding. And I won't talk about the, let me just give you an example, one example of a U-shaped or a hill-shaped. Think of a publicly traded company. It needs a CEO. One candidate, there's a candidate who's the traders here that is being considered. This candidate is a controversial, radical guy. And if hired, he can be either very good for the company because he shakes things up, or she shakes things up, or very bad because this person can be very disruptive. There'll be resistance and talent who leave, etc. So from traders' perspective, effectively, there are three states of the world, we can think of it. The radical person is, this candidate is hired, and the good outcome happens, and he or she that's been hired will make the company better. This person has been hired, and it's a disaster. Or this person is not hired at all and there's no change. Now, if you have information that says that this controversial person is likely to be hired, that's your private information. That's equivalent to a U-shaped. You have a U-shaped information. You are the type that, depending on how the market is moving, you might go one way or you might go the other way. And on the other hand, if your information says this guy has no chance, I know the committee that is appointing, they're not going to appoint this guy, then you are you're a contrarian, and you will buy when the price has gone down and sell when the price is high. There are many examples. I'm kind of conscious of time, and I want to get one. Before I leave this, I want to just say one other thing about the finance, and I'll just turn briefly to organ transplantation, if I may. So we understand how this social learning, contrarian herding happens in this financial market with efficient prices. But what's the consequence of it? So this, so far, it's all been about what Frank Hahn appreciated, which is understanding what's going on. What's the implication that if people are herding one way or the other, what's the kind of welfare implication? So to do that, we also, in this work, we compare price path in two scenarios. We take our model, the one I just described, and agents know they have access to public information. They know all the trade that has taken place. They know past prices, so they can learn from each other. And we compare it with another kind of world where it's exactly the same, and except in this alternative world, I call the opaque world. For some reason, the agents cannot use, they don't have access to public information. So they can only use their private information. So social learning, by definition, is excluded. And we have results that shows that, formal results that shows that volatility in prices is higher and bid and ask spreads increases. So these, when you have in the transparent world compared to the opaque world, this is just one simulation on the data that we have, and we have formal results, but this is the kind of simulations that we had in terms of price volatility. In terms of this is the price volatility of this asset, comparing transparent with the opaque. We have. I want to talk about one last thing. We also do take. There's some recent work that I've done with Henning. We take this model to data on a particular stock in 1995 that was traded in New York Stock Exchange, Ashland, and we do a structural, we do estimation, and in this kind of doing the estimation, we find that 35% of days that we look at has features, the herd behavior appears at some point. Let me just, I've got about 15 minutes. I want to, in this 15 minutes, I want to turn to completely just to another topic, another application, which is a surprising application. These are really about expert organ transplantation. Now, there are many economic environments in which we have buyers acting sequentially. They must decide to whether to hire, to take an employment market. You are on the market and you're looking for a job, and there are these employers, and the first employer comes to you and looks at your CV, does an interview, and decides to take you or not take you. If doesn't take you, then you're available. The second employer might look at you, and the third employer might look at you, and so on. So these employers can do social learning in the sense that they know that if the first three employers have not taken you, then you probably are not very good, and they are not going to take you. So can this happen? If you have stayed on the market looking for jobs more than 6 months, does it affect your possibility of getting the job later on? Organ transplantation is like that. Employment market is like that. This example is very similar to the BHW, except for 2 things. One is that once an object is accepted, the game ends. So if you have been, the first employer takes you, that's it. If the organ is accepted, is transplanted, is gone. There is not a decision for the second, third, etc. And also, the decision problem is not stationary for employers, because if the good, if you're the 5th, 6th, 7th person on the employment market, all the good guys have already been employed. So the pool deteriorates, the pool of what is available, the quality might deteriorate as you wait. But the model is, the story is similar to BHW, and we wanted to test for evidence of herding amongst, in the context of organ transplantation. Decisions on whether an organ is transplanted or not is taken jointly, usually with the patient and the doctor, the surgeon, the center, the hospital. In practice, people that I've talked to, we have got, this was a project, we have surgeons involved in it as well. They assured me that effectively in practice is the surgeon, the guy who makes the decision rather than the patient. Although the patient can always say no, but it's really, these decisions are made by experts. So we had to kind of devise testing for these things are difficult because so many things is not observable. We apply our analysis, so we look at the UK data. So organs are donated and allocating them in an efficient and equitable way is really paramount, and the objective is to reduce, and waiting lists are long, objective is to reduce the waiting list. And when a deceased donor organ becomes available in the UK, what happens is that all patients on the national registry are assigned a priority ranking based on some algorithm to do with the patient. The transplant surgeons are offered the organ in order of the patient's priority until the organ is either accepted or it's just gone on too long, and then it's just the organ has deteriorated. So it's no longer, transplantation is no longer viable. Currently, as I said, demand outstrips the available livers, available organs. Both we looked at liver and kidney. These are the main transplantation. Approximately what we have, despite this excess demand, 50% of livers and 30% of kidneys are discarded. Of course, organs may be discarded because they are of poor quality, but there's another possibility, and that is some viable organs fail to be utilized because once an organ has been rejected by one center, especially these centers, they think of, there are the good centers. There's a hierarchy about what's the good center and what's not as good. If one good center rejects the organ, subsequent centers might ignore their own assessment, and they might herd behind their predecessors. So think of it. So I'm now giving you the model. It's very similar to what we had before. There are 2 types of organ, capital G and capital B, good or bad. The transplant centers, the surgeons or the patients, we could just call the decision maker here that decides whether to accept the organ and do the transplantation or not. They have their own private assessment about the quality of the organ, and this could be small g, which means it's likely to be a good organ, or signal small b, it's likely to be a bad organ. And we're going to depart from the BHW in another way, which is that these centers are of different ability. They have different precisions. So some centers are better at judging than another one. So we're going to call the ability of the center J, the hospital J or surgeon J, QJ. And what that means is that these conditions, so the likelihood that their information, this is probability of receiving small g given the organ is good, this depends on QJ. If QJ is close to half, that center is not very able. If it's close to 1, is very able to detect. Now, we assume that the first center doesn't have any information other than private assessment, so they will accept if they have the good signal, small g, and reject if they have the bad signal. Now, beyond the first first position, when we come to the second, third centers that they receive the organ, they have to decide whether the organ is good enough for their patient, and they go ahead. There are two possibilities. One is that these surgeons or the centers, they don't do any social learning. They just look at they have a lot of information about the organ. They look at the organ and they decide, well, this is good or not. We're going ahead or not. Or they might be doing social learning. They know that, I'm going to make it some story up, it's not that far from the truth. They know that the center is Cardiff in England, and knows that Cambridge has rejected this organ, and St. Thomas's in London has just rejected the organ. Cardiff might think that the organ is good, but the first two are, they have real, they are the giants in the transplantation, and they have rejected, so they might, so Cardiff might reject as well. So that's the case of social learning, the herding they might do, or maybe they are not doing it. We are trying to test which one of these is true. And if the first center Q1, that's the ability of the first center, is above the others, then the first center does what the center thinks is the best thing. And if it receives a bad signal, B rejects. If it receives good, it will accept that the game, it will end. But if suppose it receives a B signal, it will reject. The center in the second position, now from the cascade starts from the second position, because Q2 is whatever the information that the second guy has, knows that the first guy is rejected. Given that the first guy's ability is more than the second guy, the second center will follow, and so on. So we could have the organ being rejected, it's a good organ, it's rejected just because the first center has rejected it. Now, testing for these things are complicated because the decisions are correlated for many reasons. Now, for example, an obvious test one can do, one can look at the probability of the rejection by the second center and write it as, and test it, run a regression on probability of rejection by the second center based on the ability, regressed on the ability, somehow we quantify the ability, I don't have time to talk about it, the ability of the first center. So the higher the first center ability is, that means the first center is very able. So the second center, so the first center is basically, if it rejects, the organ must be bad. So if the organ is bad, you're going to reject as well. Even if you're not doing social learning, you are going to reject, the second guy is going to reject, because the pool is the pool of organs is actually poor. If the first guy is very good and is only rejecting the bad organs. So if you find this alpha 1, the regression is positive, it doesn't indicate that there is herding. It could be that the pool is getting worse. So we introduced two tests I just briefly mentioned these, and then I'm going to stop. So we do a regression of the probability of rejection by the second centers when centers are second in the line, and regress it on ability of the first center that has gone before, the ability of the second center, and a cross effect. So so this is the cross effect of the ability of the first and the center. And we are interested in this, the coefficient of this third coefficient, the alpha 3. This alpha 3 captures the effect of if the ability of the first center goes up, you're choosing the more able center, the first center that has to make a decision is more able. How does it affect the probability of rejection by the second center if the second center is more able or less able? So that's what the alpha 3 is. And alpha 3, if there is no social learning, the alpha 3 must be positive, basically because center 2 is more responsive to the deterioration of the organs. If center 1 is more able, center 2 is more responsive to the deterioration of the organ, can pick up things better if center 2 is itself higher ability. So this alpha 3, if no social learning, has to be positive. With social learning, that's not the case because there is another effect coming in. And the other effect coming in is that the herding effect, which is the second center might be, the second center might be herding, and you herd more if the first center is actually more able. I'm conscious of time. If there is social learning or herd possibility, this alpha 3 could be negative. And we actually quantify, and in our setup, it turns out that alpha 3 with social learning is going to be negative. The second effect dominates for liver, the data corresponding to liver, and it's positive for kidney. So our prediction is that with social learning, the alpha 3 will have a different sign depending on liver and kidney. And if there was no social learning, it always will be positive. Here's the regression, and these are the coefficients that we find. And this is, so what we find is consistent with social learning. The sign changes for this. This is the alpha 3 on this row for kidney and liver. We also do another test, which is really, we found it very surprising, which is we looked at the behavior rejection rate of the third centers. Now, if there was no, and we did a regression, which is we are looking at probability of rejection by the third center as a function of the ability of the first and the second centers. And if there was no social learning, the impact of if center 1 was becoming more able or center 2 was becoming more able, the effect of these two, if there was no social learning, would be exactly the same on probability of rejection of center 3, because center 3 is rejecting, is going to be affected by these abilities, because these abilities affect the pool that is left for you. So if these two, the first two, have same ability, so Q1 and Q2 were the same, this lambda 1 and lambda 2 must also be the same if there was no social learning. It doesn't matter whether it was the first, anyway, I won't say any more. On the other hand, with social learning, that's not the case. If you're the third guy and the first center's decision is more important, the lambda 1 must be more important than lambda 2, because the lambda 2s, some of these guys are, some of the number 2s are this social learning is possible, so they could be herding. So if they are herding, they are not going to make the pool any worse, because they are just going to reject irrespective of their signal. So with social learning or herding, lambda 1 should be greater than lambda 2, and we actually have the data that we have and the testing that we had does indicate that this is the lambda 1 is here, and lambda 2, and the lambda 1s are for the entire sample is twice as big as lambda 2. When we take the Q1s and Q2s to be very close to each other, centers which are very close, this is even more startling. When the Q1 and Q2 are close together, the lambda 1 and lambda 2, lambda 1 is clearly a lot more significant and bigger than lambda 2. I'm going to stop. There's more. We have so much evidence that these organ transplantation herding is very common. We do some structural estimation. This is proportion of decisions with herding is when you're in third, fourth, fifth, etc. position, very significant. The last thing is, what's the implication of this, of the fact that this organ transplantation there is herding? Should it be that we should just they should not each center, when they make their decisions, they should not know how many centers have rejected? Not necessarily, because you still want to learn from others, but how do you do the learning without starting a cascade? I should stop, and thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Hamid, for this beautiful presentation, theory, and applications. We do have time for a couple of questions from the floor, if there are questions. Well, maybe I can break the ice. Now, I see, please correct me if I'm wrong, I think there are two, the financial market example and the organ transplantations have two different, they have similarities, but they also have differences in the following sense, that in the financial markets, the actions taken, which is the observable, namely biocell, could be the outcome of a strategic decision, okay? In the organ transplantation story, if you observe, a rejection, it's hard to interpret, the observable as a sort of strategic decision in the sense of inducing the following ones to do something that the rejecter would like them to do, like in the financial market. You see what I mean? The early choices in the financial market may be done in order to induce the follow-ups to buy or sell. In the organ transplantation, that I think is more difficult to imagine. So I think the strategizing of the early choices may have a lot of sense in financial markets. I was just wondering whether it makes sense to think in these terms in organ transplantations.
The actual model that we did for the financial market, we also we assumed throughout in that model that the traders were myopic. So they were buying or selling in order to make money at that time. So they were also not strategic in the model that we looked at. So the entire talk that I've done is that the agents have talked about, they were all myopic in their decision. They were not strategic in the sense that you're describing.
In reality,
whereas in many problems, financial market could be an example, they are actually strategic in the sense that they deliberately want to change the information of the others in a strategic way. So if you actually do that, some of that might be actually considered illegal in the financial market. Manipulating markets is illegal. But I think the better example of the manipulation or strategic in the sense that you're describing is in the question of social media, the belief formation, how you might actually deliberately try to put seeds in the communication. I briefly mentioned communication cascade, belief cascade. That's even more extreme. So in the political side, if you apply this to the kind of political domain, that's really very important. And modeling that. There is some literature on that.
But in the transplantation, I wouldn't see
in the transplantation,
no. Strategizing.
No.
And after all, Frank would say a gentleman would not strategize.
They're more gentlemen. They're doctors.
Gentlemen would not strategize.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Okay, more questions. Okay, so if there are no other questions, because it was a extremely, I would say, so exhaustive presentation, we would like to thank you, Hamid, for having accepted our invitation for this beautiful presentation. And thank you very much from all of us.
Thank you. Thank you.
But why don't they have a key or first sentence deciding simultaneously?
No, but then it's not clear that you will kill information because you actually want to know what the ideal thing.
Which way do you want to learn? And how much you want to blockade the cascade? Because if